I'm Molly Anne Sweeney. I'm a playwright, a theatre facilitator, and I co-run a theatre company called Wise Ram Theatre. Sophia Bagge is my colleague, and we both run the company, so I do a lot of admin at the last minute. I've written our first production, Decommissioned. I'm at the beginning process of co-writing a new project with Sophia, which is inspired by the Victorian poem Goblin Market about food and the climate crisis. And we also run workshops that we run together. So we run regular workshops at the Glitch Bar in Waterloo, and also workshops in the community and with children and young people and students at universities about climate theatre. We started running these workshops at the Glitch in September 2022, I think, and they're just exploring different aspects of climate theatre. So we've had workshops about design, about kind of sustainable production, about characters. Today's workshop was about kind of how we visually represent the climate crisis and the idea of a climate aesthetic or an environmental aesthetic, and the ways that we tell stories using pictures. I'm a writer, so I often do kind of writing focused workshops, but we also do ones that are really kind of playful and use a lot of games. So we've had may have heard of this drama game Zip Zap Boing, where you throw a ball of energy around the room, which is like an invisible ball, and we do that but using climate terms. We've done a game where we kind of adapted different projects, so the Fast and the Furious movies, which is about road racing. People adapted those so that all of the characters were on bikes instead of cars. So we do all sorts of random stuff, but basically every month people can come to Waterloo, and they don't have to be professional theatre makers or climate activists, they just have to be interested in the ideas. We've had really interesting people. So we've had some people who are just vaguely interested in theatre. We had one person who was a photographer, really interested in getting involved in climate photography, and walked in and we were playing a drama game, and he looked a little bit like he wanted to walk out, but he got around to it in the end. We've had some climate theatre, some theatre makers who like really doing amazing, inspiring work, or people who think someone came who taught Sophia on her masters, so that was he was really great and lovely. We tend to have a mixture of people making sort of fringe theatre and people making and people who are sort of interested in it sometimes from a professional point of view, so in terms of their climate work. So we've had someone from the local council from local government come and talk about, just wanting to use climate to communicate about the climate change. So use theatre to communicate about climate change. So I think that's something we really love about it. We often think in terms of marketing it might be better if it was aimed at writers or theatre makers or XYZ, but instead we just like that it's aimed at everyone. I don't want to speak for Sophia, but it feels like we weren't people who were like climate activists at all before this process. We didn't know that the theatre company was going to be a climate theatre company when we were talking about setting it up. So we definitely don't come from a point of view of people who know everything or were like inspired to be activists from an early age or anything like that. It's more that through making the show, we sort of started to learn more about things, be more like aware of it, and also slightly have a sense of embarrassment to begin with. I think certainly from my side, I was like, we had a very early work in progress performance at play Decommissioned, and I bought 2 items of set from IKEA that were very cheap. And they were just 2 very cheap IKEA stools. And I was like, oh God, I rang a play about climate change and I've just done that. So I kind of ended up being like, we should think more about sustainability. And I still have and use those stools. So I'm like, and we have used them in other versions of the production. They're like this like talisman. But I think that there is a real benefit to that, because we're very like open and relaxed and willing to hear people at the beginning of their journey and can talk about going on a journey of sustainability. And when we tell climate shows, when we tell climate stories or make climate theatre, we start from a place of like curiosity and playfulness, and wanting to try out all sorts of different stories and write a romantic comedy or a thriller or something really like weird and funny and slightly out there, rather than really focusing with a message, which I think is harder to engage with. It's interesting. Generally, I think there's often a lot of enthusiasm. There is a lot of desire to programme theatre about climate change, but we have also had people say, oh, I don't think that's it, but interest. And no one has said because it's about climate change. Maybe it's because the play that we're touring is like a kind of young adult, like people in their 20s, and that isn't always of interest to theatre programmers in different parts of the country, which makes sense. And it's like a relatively smaller scale show, so there's those kind of things. So you couldn't say, they didn't want to like get away with your climate change nonsense. I think often there's a lot of ideas that climate work is for children, and that's like there's a real sense of that. Often a lot of the work that you see is child focused, very often for like young ages, about recycling and really lovely beautiful stories, and we kind of want to make work that it doesn't, because that we feel like that audience is really well served, especially the under 7s. So we're kind of like wanting to make a fantasy story about climate change that is a bit more kind of like out there and not so obviously like moralistic. I think there's something there that people tend to have an idea of what a climate story is. Climate theatre is something really earnest and worthy, and something that's very maybe you're kind of going to go home and feel really bad about yourself, and people are often surprised at how funny. I mean, I'm talking about my own play, but I've heard people go, I'm so surprised at how funny it is, and how many slightly stupid jokes there are, and how many things there are that are you're getting swept along with the story and the jokes and the romance, rather than you're sat down and kind of the IPCC report is read out. Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, one thing we did with the play Decommissioned is it opens with a character who is a teacher who is teaching a class of 10-year-olds about climate change. And I kind of chose that, and it's a long story of how it began with that opening it. But I think I was very anxious about the idea of an audience being told off or an audience being lectured. So I begin with an audience being lectured and told off by a teacher, because it immediately plays with the fact that you're in that zone. So the audience, their cast is children who are misbehaving suddenly in this world where they're having to be having to just hear these facts about how to prepare for a flood. And so I'm really so that was one thing that we kind of brought in. And then also there is a couple, so there's a woman who's a kind of climate activist and researcher, and her partner who is a teacher and works with children, and they're kind of battling on how best to interact with, how best to communicate about the climate crisis and what's the most effective way. She's a very committed character who she doesn't drive even though they live in a rural area and he does, and so there's a kind of tension between that. But I think their relationship was the kind of beginning that they have a big argument about climate change, but it's actually about their relationship, so you're kind of always putting it in the situation. And I suppose there's also jokes based on your own experience. So you might have heard of the book The Uninhabitable Earth, which is a book that begins in English. It begins with, "It is worse, much worse than you think." And it that's as about as cheerful as it gets, honestly. And the main character, Gwen, who's a climate activist, wants to lend that book to a 10-year-old boy So like playing with those kind of things, yeah. So that's a very long answer, but I think to sum it up, I would say that being a human being is about making jokes and being silly or being stupid or making mistakes and laughing at them and being laughed at and playing around with those things. So, and climate change is about humans, so you can't not have those things in there, I think. I think having a space for people to do those things, like be playful or make mistakes or try out different ideas, and we'd really love it if there were just a few ideas that went forward, and maybe for all sorts of different people who do theatre professionally or as a hobby, just to bring a little bit of climate in, like rather than only talking to all of the people who are like making the climate show. It's like the idea that you would just bring a little bit of that into your work, or that maybe you'll just think in that way. So beginning to really just share ideas and meet people. We've met so many interesting people who are making such great work, and also I do find them really fun. I think we both find them really fun. Mm-hmm. Travel to London from wherever you are. It was very important. I would say follow the things that you really like and are really interested in. So if you want to make a climate show but you're someone who really loves absurdist theatre, make that. If you're an anime person, make an anime about climate change. Or if you're a romantic comedy person, it's about, two Arctic researchers, who fall in love over disagreements. Like, definitely don't hold back from the things that you really love as a creator, because it's about climate change. Tell the story you really want to tell that is about the things you love, rather than thinking, it has to be serious, or it has to be dark, or it has to be, grown up.
Thank you very much.